In this video, I'm going to discuss the different type of economic systems and how we can use some measures to identify the level of development of each market or country that we have in the world. First of all, we need to remember that in the last 60 years, we experienced the emergence of these global markets. And basically the level of market and economical integration improved very fast in these last years. Indeed, we faced many changes, like the increase of volume of capital, so it's very easy to invest in another country, to have business in other areas of the world. Also, we have one increase the gross domestic product or GDP per GDP. We are facing the increase of GDP in many countries in the world, and in the world as in general. In the last decades, we have some moments of crisis, but in general we have just one stable increasement in the GDP in different countries in the world. Also, we have the world economy being much greater than the economy of any country operating in the world. So right now we don't have just one country that can lead our economy. We have many different countries with their own role over this political and economical scenario in the world. Also, we faced the end of Cold War, and with the end of Cold War, with the fall of the wall from Berlin, we can say that we have one improvement, and so this integration, the integration of economies become even more faster than before. And finally, the emergence of internet and personal computers increased even more these integrations. And right now we can have communications and work anywhere in the world and have business with people everywhere. When you think about it, these big changes will have a direct impact in the way that you do marketing, but especially in the way that we run the economies in each country. And which are the economic systems that can be used or that are more common in different countries in the world. Keegan, one very famous global marketing author, presents these metrics to classify the major economic systems that exist or that can exist, that have existed in the past in the world. And basically, this matrix is based on two dimensions. The first dimension is the dimension resource allocation. So you can have the allocation of resources driven by the market or driven by some central command, like a central government. And the second dimension is the resource and ownership. You can have the majority of resources belong to the private, in the hands of private person or private business, and you can have the resource ownership belonging to the state. So when you make a mix of the resource allocation and resource ownership, you will have four different economic systems. The first one is the market capitalism. Is where the market will make choice. So basically, business will be the owners, people and business will own the majority of the resources in the economy, and also they will drive their decisions to invest these resources according to what is demanded by the market. Because of that, is named as market capitalism. In that case, individuals and firms will allocate resources in order to maximize their profit. And also, the production, basically it's in the hands of private business. And customers will be the ones that will make the decision where the resources will be allocated, because business will look to customers and say, okay, these customers want these products, so I'm going to use my resources to produce it. And because of that, in the end, consumers will be the voice that will drive the market. Because of that, is named as market capitalism. And finally, In this kind of economic system, we have a role of the government. It's basically to keep competition and keep the protection of customers and protection of citizens in these countries. In that case, market capitalism is basically the model running in most developed countries like United States, European countries, and many other developed countries in the world. On the other hand, we can have the resource allocation, the command made by a central command, by a central government. And also you can have the private ownership of resources. In these cases, basically you have a system where the government will have a lot of forces and enforcement actions to tell what will be the objectives of the economy. So basically the government will put a lot of money in some sectors, and these sectors will be the ones that will have the majority of the resources to produce products, to produce something in that economy. And in that case, you can see that, but the business in itself, they belong to private people. In Brazil, it's a very good example because Brazil, we have a lot of resources in the hand of the federal government. We have a lot of rules, we have a lot of laws that restrain the competition, restrain the way that you can apply the resources. And because of that, in the end, the government is telling what are the priorities and telling what you can do and what you can't do. You have some examples of some developed countries that can be defined in this model, but Brazil is one. And in general, in these economies, you can have the rise of corruption and inefficiencies in the market because basically the decisions are not based on what is best for producing more to increase the gross domestic product, but only the decisions usually aimed to identify the interest groups that will have more influence in the government, and then these influence groups can have benefits from the resources that the government and the laws that the government are passing through the country. And because of that, you create a system that is so hard to compete, and sometimes it's not so easy to have business there. On the other hand, you can have the resource owned by the state. And also, the resource allocation will be made by the market. This is a very unusual economic system, but we have some models like that. The best examples are China and India. In that cases, the market, so the decisions to allocate the resources are based on what is demanded, based on the demands of the market. But in the end, the governments control everything. So it's basically China. So it's basically a capitalist. It's considered, you can see that production is a capitalism, but in the end it's socialism. So it's a very unusual economic system, but in some countries you can have a huge development like in China. Of course, you have some side effects on that. And finally, you can have a central command and a resource, and the state owns everything. So the resource ownership, where everything belongs to the state. This is the central planned socialism. Basically, this is the opposite of market capitalism. In that case, the idea is that the state will hold everything in order to provide the best to everyone. Indeed, in that case, usually you have a lot of demand, but you don't have enough supply to give to people what they usually need. Usually the government owns a lot of business. Usually they run everything, and they have little. Basically, here you don't have real differentiation between products and services. And indeed, this economic system is basically ruined. It's not existing anymore in the world. We have some examples like Cuba and Venezuela, but even that case is not really this pure model of central planned socialism. And basically, we can see that Basically, we had Russia with that model in the past, but since the end of Cold War, there is no model, real company, real country running this model nowadays. What happens with these models is that in some countries where it's very easy to see that you have market capitalism, you have much more competition, and usually the business will improve and increase and develop faster, and you have more technology to create new products in these markets. Usually here you have highly competitive markets and highly competitive sectors there. In the central planned capitalism, usually it's very common when you have a country like Brazil, where you have a lot of natural resources and the government will rule these natural resources or create a lot of rules or laws and make it difficult to have a lot of competition. So in this case, you need to, if you have a country, if you're operating in a country like that, you need to be prepared to lead or to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of complications caused by the law. And in the market socialism, you can operate there like China and India, but you need to have a lot of caution, because basically you need to fulfill all requirements from the government, and in the end you need to be aware that the government will rule everything, and they can create a lot of restrictions for business. And in central planned socialism, basically there is no business there, because everything belongs to the state. So there is no global marketing, no global trade in countries that use this economic system. Not the business models that we have in capitalist system. Of course, looking to different countries in the world and trying to identify which of these four economic systems are which of those is running in each country is not so easy, because you have a lot of variation. So you can have a more broad look to these to other factors to understand what will be the impacts of this economic system in the way that you do business in that country. First of all, you need to look to the type of economy, if it's an industrial state, emerging economy, economy in transition, or a developing nation. The type of government is ruled by monarchy, dictatorship, or you have a tyranny there, a tyrant there. And in that case, of course, the way that you're going to do business will be affected by this political system running there. And also look to the how many parties are operating the country, the nation is dominated. Do you have really democracy in that country? So look at these questions. The trade and capital flows. Do you have free trade in this country, or you have a lot of blocks for trade, a lot of taxes, a lot of rules? Look to the currency board, the exchange, and how the country is controlling the exchange there. For instance, we can say the example of Argentina, that that usually control the value of dollars. So basically, they're creating one way to block the trade, because they know that their own currency really it's not worth it. It's not worth too much. Also, look to the commanding sectors in that country. Which sectors are more important? Is it transportation? Which sectors are important? And also look to the most important sectors. They are really owned by the state or operated by state, like transports, communications, and energy. Usually, when these sectors are owned by the state, it's basically in countries where you have a lot of control from the government on the way that you run the economy. And of course, this can bring some problems for running a business there. And is there some relationship between public and private ownership? For instance, we have Banco do Brasil, we have Petrobras, so you can buy shares of these companies in the financial markets, but in the end, these companies belong to the government. And are the prices are these prices and products controlled by the government? For instance, for a long time, Brazil governments used the price of oil to control inflation. So this is one example of how the central command can be used to achieve some objectives from the government. And when you have a country like that, this is a sign that this country probably you have a lot of rules and controls over the private business. Also look to the service provided by the states. Is there pension, healthcare, education? Of course, this is related to good life conditions, and which of these sectors are owned by the government and how is owned by the government, and if the systems are really privatized, usually you have more freedom for business in these countries. And institutions, look if you have corruption or free press. Look to how is the level of corruption in that country. Usually corruption is related to a lot of restrictions on the way that you do business. You have a lot of laws that usually it's created sometimes even to protect the criminal. So you need to take care and look to these institutions to see if the country is really a good country to have business there. And also look to the market. What is the size of the market? If you have a very entrepreneurial or an innovative market there, you have startups, or you have like big industry like monopolies, cartels, or concentrated industries. And also look how different tasks in the economy are shared by governments and private business, and how you support the labor force also in that country. After making the analysis of the economic system running in each country, then you can move to analyze the level of development of the countries that you are focusing for your business. One very famous way to make this classification of the levels of development is to use the World Bank classification. The World Bank classifies the economies and the countries in the world based on the gross national income. Gross national income is very similar to gross domestic product, but in the end you have you sum the income that is generated by non-resident sources. For instance, if you have a company operate abroad and this company brings income to your country, so this is taken into account when you estimate the gross national income. And how is the definition of of country development based on the gross national income or the World Bank classification? You have the high-income countries where you have that belong to OECD. So basically here we have countries with more than 12,000 per capita in terms of GNI, so gross national income, and that belong to OECD. We have high-income countries that does not belong to OECD, and these are very developed countries, and but they are not part of OECD. We have the upper middle income countries with gross national income greater than $4,000 per capita, and in that case you have a huge amount of population. As you can see here, the population is huge in this group. If I'm not wrong, we are in this group. Brazil is in this group right here, and also you have 25% of the world gross domestic product. And we have lower middle income countries with more than $1,000 per capita in terms of GNI, and you have even a greater amount of people in this group living in countries like that. And you have here you have some countries in Asia, some countries in South America, Central America, And also we have low-income countries. Most of them are in sub-Saharan Africa and with less than $1,000 in terms of GNI. And as you can see, you can look to the countries, identify the gross national income, and see the level of development. If you have a country, a richer country, or if you're talking about a poor country or an average income country. In this map, you will see the gross domestic product per capita in each country in the world, according to the different levels, using data from the World Bank. Let's see some characteristics of countries in each category of the World Bank classification. Low-income countries, usually they have a limited industrialization and a lot of population still works in agriculture or subsistence farming. Also, it's very common in these countries to have high birth rates and short life expectancy. The literacy rates are really low in these countries, and many of them rely on foreign aid, like on medicine or because of wars. And it's very common to have in these countries a lot of instability and wars. For instance, and they are most common in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. You have the lower middle income countries, and sometimes we call these countries like less developed countries, and usually they are starting their industrialization process. Some of them have a lot of them will have very cheap labor markets, so a lot of companies will go there to produce items that will be sold all over the world. And it's very common to have a lot of factories from clothing, tires, and more basic materials that we use to create more developed products in developed economies. Also, we have in this group we have right now India. So it's also named as a big emerging economy because it's basically economy with this classification, but with a lot of characteristics and a lot of influence around the world. We have the upper middle income countries, and they are facing a fast industrialization. The wages usually are rising in these countries. The level of literacy and education are evolving over the years in these countries, but they still have lower wage costs compared to the developed countries. Some of them will be called as newly industrializing economies. And we have a lot of BAMs, or big emerging economies in this group, like Brazil, China, Mexico, and South Africa. Just to say the example, we have here the countries that belong to the BRICS, and these BRIC countries are basically the majority of them are in this category. And then we have the high-income countries, and they are usually referred as post-industrial countries. Usually have a highly important service sector, technology, and they create technology that is sold all over the world. And the most important asset in these economies the most important is knowledge. So they invest a lot of money in transforming science and technology into new business. And we have in many of these countries are really long-term oriented, not only the governments but also the citizens in these countries. And usually we have some examples like the Group of Seven, like United States, Japan, Germany, France, Britain, Canada, and Italy. One important aspect to analyze in each country is whether they belong or not to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This international organism is basically a group of countries that are seeking to improve the economies and the quality of life for their citizens. And they state that their objective is enable its members to achieve the highest sustainable economic growth and improve the economic and social well-being of their populations. We have currently these countries belonging to OECD, and of course we have some countries trying to enter in this group. And once you enter there, you have a lot of guidance for improving your economy. But most of them are related to the free markets and how you let the competition improve the economies in these countries. In this chart, we have a joke about the BRICS countries. BRICS refers to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In that case, these countries are usually considered important since they have big economies with huge populations. And because of that, they have a very important influence in terms of politics and economy around the world. In this chart, we're basically saying that most of BRICS countries improved their economies and influence in the last years, but not that for South Africa. But let's take a look and what is the importance of BRIC countries and how they, as a group of countries, can have an impact and what are the importance of them in the global trade.
In 2001, Goldman Sachs predicted that a group of developing and newly industrialized countries could come to dominate Western economies. Since then, those countries have exploded in growth and changed the landscape of world politics. So what are BRICS countries? BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those 5 countries comprise nearly half of the world's population, a quarter of the world's landmass, and a fifth of the world's GDP. Their combined GDP is nearly that of the United States and growing. A major aspect of their alliance is the formation of the New Development Bank to compete with the IMF and the World Bank. This gives them greater leeway to loan each other and other countries money for development unrestricted by Western influence. Estimates as to their rate of growth tend to vary. Some say that they'll overtake the G7 economies by 2027. Others suggest they might achieve that goal by 2050. This will largely be fueled by the rapid expansion of the middle class and higher GDP per capita. At the forefront is China. In 2013, they passed the $4 trillion mark in trade and passed the United States to become the largest trade country in the world. China's GDP could rival the US's by 2020, as it is already the second largest economy. India's expansion has led to the prosperity of the middle class in recent years. Part of this is due to the fact that 10 of the 30 fastest growing urban areas are located in India. Brazil, which is oil and iron rich, grew to become the 6th largest economy in the world in 2012, briefly overtaking the United Kingdom. However, Russia has seen economic difficulty and a declining population. Recent sanctions and geopolitical problems have increasingly isolated Russia from the rest of the BRICS. The final country, South Africa, was added to the group in 2010, despite having a significantly lower population and economy than any of the others. However, South Africa is the strongest African economy and provides a significant foothold on the continent for China and India. Despite their strong growth, many have said it will be unsustainable as resources are depleted. A growing population will rapidly deplete them and could sabotage the ability to grow at the same pace. Another critique is the overt dominance of China's economy. Without China, the BRICS would have little political clout, and this gives China veto power over BRICS issues. In fact, China's economy alone is larger than the rest of the BRICS combined. Additionally, all 5 countries have mixed records on human rights and ongoing conflicts with their neighboring countries. Regardless, the BRICS have seen significant growth in recent years. Even if they don't become the world's dominant economies, they'll still have far surpassed any expectations from the 20th century. Want to learn about how powerful these countries are on their own? We've covered each of them in these 5 videos. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming stuff we've got coming your way on TestTube News. And thank you for watching.
As you can see with these figures, basically the BRICS countries represents a great part of the world's population and also a great part of the world's gross domestic product, a relevant part of the world's gross domestic product. And because of that, BRICS countries evolved, and now these countries represent a huge influence in terms of politics and economical influence around the world. One author named as Kenichiro Hamai, he told that he analyzed different big companies around the world, and then he realized that big companies that achieved a huge influence in their sectors around the world, basically they need to be successful in basically three main areas. In the Japan and the area of Asia and Pacific, you need to have a strong presence in Western Europe and also in the United States. So basically what he realizes that these big companies that achieve a relevant position in these countries became so powerful worldwide. And because of that, he suggested to look at this triad power, and if you're looking to be a leader, you need to have a very strong position in each of these areas in the world. In this graph, in the right side, you have one example. So basically, the market share, the percentage of revenues from Coca-Cola in different regions. As you can see, the Coca-Cola is very strong in these three regions, and because of that, this can be one element to support the presence of Coca-Cola in other parts of the globe. So students, with this video I intended to present how you can use some elements of the economic system to understand what's happening in different regions and countries in the world, how countries operate together to bring common politics, and how you can use this information to further develop your strategies in a global trade environment.